Hi, I'm Chris. I like to paint things, and I don't have one of those YouTuber piles of shame like some people, but I do have this. A mountain of unpainted gene stealers and all manner of Tyranids from my childhood. Today, we're gonna fix that. I was first introduced to the grim darkness of the 41st millennium with the Battle for McCraig starter set. My brother and I were given it as a Christmas present, and inside we learned about the horrors and nightmares of everybody's favorite setting, 41st millennium. I learned everything I know from this tiny rulebook that came from the beautiful art style to the very unique way Warhammer writes all of their lore. The high gothic really spoke to me as a little angsty child. I mean, this is pre-angst, we're talking 10 years old. Inside this we had beautiful aspirational paint jobs, and even a breakdown of rules. In my mind, these are still the rules of how Warhammer's played today, even though I know it's a far cry from them. This rulebook even made me want to start a Tau army, and kind of had them aligned as good guys, I suppose, on the side of the Imperium. Look at that Inquisition unit. It also had the background on the first Tyrannic War. Soon, my brother and I picked up the codexes for the time. They were amazing, full of pictures and lore and everything you needed to play for the princely sum of only $20. Phenomenal. For the year, I don't know if inflation-wise if that holds up, but they came with these gorgeous grimdark pieces of art, beautiful paint jobs on all these different Tyranids, and from that time, I was left with all of these guys. 10 Termagants, 10 Hormagaunts, 10 Gene Stealers, 5 of which have scything talons, though I don't know how much those Ymgarl faces are still a thing. We've got 3 warriors, very poorly built, but to this day my favorite Tyranid unit. 1 Carnifex I won on an eBay auction, so probably an inferior or maybe even illegal loadout. And 2 metal lictors, one of them being the old Lictor Death Leaper. After stripping the paint as much as I realistically cared to do, we first blue tacked everything down to pieces of cardboard to make priming and batches much easier. We're going to keep the Carnifex and the 2 metal lictors separate, just honestly that'd be simpler that way. Inside the codex are some great color schemes that we could follow. This was mine as a child, not too bad. I really considered doing a yellow scheme, like an insect, so I took them outside and primed them red. The whole point of my priming scheme was to get a nice red on top and do a extreme shadow on the bottom. Just kind of went back and forth with spray paints. Found this really fun, and I don't have an airbrush. We're going to go with Hive Fleet Behemoth, whatever you want to call him. And I think this is a pretty good start to get to what we want. Now, unfortunately, the spray paint was a little glossy, so I had to do something I almost never do and plan ahead. I had to take a bunch of my paints and compare them and see how their coverage would look over this extremely glossy red spray paint. The winner, I really thought, would be this white ink. As you will see later, when it came to details, it was definitely not true. Black ink, the coverage of it was just strangely abysmal. Maybe I need to work on that. This hardened carapace, same thing, just bad. And I thought about going brown before I really committed to the Hive Fleet Behemoth color scheme. So in the end, I kind of took 1 extra Hormagon I had laying around and really messed around with painting color schemes, just checking coverage over this. So I had an epiphany. Rather than paint straight over the spray paint, we would do a dry brush of proper acrylic first. I thought first we'd just do white or maybe red, something that made sense, but what came out the best was to do a dry brush of both. We did a dry brush of white mummy robes, so an off red white, and then a pure red over it. What that white did is kind of create the actual dry brushing effect we wanted, bringing out all of the highlights, everything like that, and it covered over that red spray paint very nicely. It would also let us paint over it much easier later. Then when we go back in with the pure red, it turned all of that white into a very light red, not quite pink highlight. Is exactly what I was looking for, and it was going to help us with our coverage later. Honestly, this looked great to me, but it was a little too subtle, so I went back over it even heavier, almost an overbrush of white, and then again an overbrush of this red. And I got this fantastic red highlight over everything. A lot of that carapace we're going to paint over later, as you'll see, but it gave me a great place to start. Really helped out the skin, and honestly, you know, helps you catch up those details so I know where I'm going to go with everything. Very excited. Now our whole army, you can tell what they are. Everything's got some detail. It's got great shadows. I mean, it's a really good place to start. Still a lot of work to do, but up close, I'm very happy with these results. And as I said, it's just going to make coverage much better down the road that we have a proper acrylic over that spray paint. The basis for any good Genestealer army is hordes and hordes of gaunts. We're going to start with our termagants because they have all of the different details you'll find on all the other models. We're going to use our carapace. We're going to go black and slowly build up our blues all the way into pure white. But first, we have to do the very annoying, unfortunate step of blacking out all of the carapace on these guys, which luckily isn't too much, but it gets right up next to the skin, and we have zero way of fixing that skin if we mess it up down the road. Now, I'm pretty fast with a large brush and base coating, and honestly, when they're all together, it's not going to really matter. So we start with a dry brush of my new favorite blue, Cantor Blue, over all of that black, just so that it's no longer black, and then we can paint lighter blue colors over it. Sort of the same idea as the initial dry brush. Then we take an old pot of Citadel Hoth Blue, and we do some sketchy highlights on one edge of the carapace, just going upward. This is my first time trying this technique, and I definitely refined it and then got worse at it and better at it, that sort of thing. It just kind of went back and forth. It was mostly playing. I mean, it was fun at first, and it's something that, as you see, will get very, very monotonous later. Now, it was tough to find the direction on some of these carapaces, especially the gun that has a full circle. The head had to match the back, but the head was much smaller, so it took a little more detail work to get right. And then I had to do that for 10 gaunts, and as you see, I'll have to do that for about 40 models down the road. Next, we're going to take our leather white from Reaper Minis, and we're going to do streaky white, but much lighter than the blue, much fewer streaks. And down the road, I actually changed this to a full white from Citadel. Not sure why. I actually started to think this is better, and that was maybe a mistake down the road, but we'll get there. So the idea was to do the same streaky effect, but lighter and shorter. And I've seen this effect done 100,000 times on gaunts and Genestealers and Tyranids in general. And it usually works out, at least, you know, when you paint a whole horde. I also use this color this first time to coat all of the claws and the limbs, because I figured the coverage would be a little bit better, and I hopefully wouldn't have to do 2 coats 2 coats on 40 models adds up extremely quickly. Especially when you have to do the teeth. I even did the little eyes on the guns. Not every time, but a lot of the time. And as you can see how thin that white is, we definitely do need a second coat. I started off using black eyes for everybody because I thought it would be a more alien effect. And then I washed all of the leather parts with sepia tone. I don't think I did a second coat on these guys, which is why I was very unhappy with the results the first time. And then we washed everybody in an all-over wash of Citadel's Nuln Oil. But I just was not very happy with this. I don't know. It's a good thing I did it all, the same scheme on 10 guys, so we had to go back in and fix everything. I found that doing a highlight of my pure red color really helped bring back out all of that color. But god, that white just did not look good, so I had to spend the second afternoon redoing all of that leather white, re-highlighting it, re-washing it, fixing all of my mistakes with that. Something I'd like to avoid the rest of this project if I can help it, because it's such a long endeavor, but inevitably mistakes will be made. Those highlights though really help, as you can see, compared to the gaunt on the left. And then I spent an afternoon fixing every single gaunt. But at the end of the day, I had a scheme I was very happy with. And there they are lined up in 10, and that effect is very well pronounced when you have a whole squad of the guys. Maybe on an individual scale that's debatable, but a whole squad and then a whole army will look the business. Alright, Gene Stealer time. I've been really liking the idea of having my armies not entirely all one color, so we're going to make the Gene Stealer's carapace orange instead. We're going to follow the same steps we did before, but one, I don't have to black out the entire back of another 10 models, and two, it'll add some nice differentiation later. So I dry brush with some Troll Slayer orange, that's a mouthful, and then I went back in with a brush and just caught the spines a little bit. This is a very light color, and I'm not very good with orange. Next, we're gonna try a different color for all of our white parts. We're gonna go with some Liquitex white ink as opposed to our leather white from earlier. Maybe we'll get different results this time. Painted all the bones, the tongue, and everything. Same problem though, I realized after I washed it, it really needed 2 coats, and 2 coats with an ink is just a tall order. It's just not something I wanted to do. Rather than waste a bunch of money on Nuln Oil, I tried to make my own shade paint using these ingredients. See how it goes. On first application, it looked really great, but it took a long time to dry, and I really need to pick up the pace.
1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going down. Mine is in me. Clever will split. 28 me. Eating people. Made of people. Radio wave. Murder baby. Fuck the bullet. Drink and breathe. Do what you want. Kill on disease. Bloody current. Stand with the face. Shatter a dream. Lost in a fire.
Yeah, that was my college punk band. In the spirit of talking about old models, I'm bringing back some of my old music. Anyways, about halfway through this project now. Alright, let's change up the pace and paint one single model. We're going to paint one of our metal lictors who, boy, when I was a kid, there was no chance on me building this guy. I had to re-go in as an adult with power tools and epoxies and Don't ask me why I put his weird pincer things down. I kind of like it though. It adds a different pose to him. We're basically repeating the same steps on all of our other models. We're going to black out all of the carapace, and then we're going to do a hard dry brush. Almost not even an overbrush, somewhere in between. There's still a good amount of paint on the dry brush. And then we're going to use our Hoeth Blue to grab every single one of these carapace edges, which, boy, it just gets very, very old very quickly. As you can see from about halfway through, there's definitely some spots I decided to not really take my time on. Which, I mean, is sort of the way when it comes to painting 1,000 models at a time. And then this is when I switched up from using that leather white to full, whatever Citadel's pot white is. I don't remember if it's Corax or if that's just a spray. Either way, it's a white Citadel paint out of the pot. Don't ask me why I switched up. I actually kind of like their paints, but the leather white from Reaper is probably a better consistency and a better quality paint. But over these lighter blues, I had zero problems painting this in, etching in these rough little streaks. And I probably could have made my life easier by using something else. Honestly, I'm sure I forgot. I forgot which paint I used, but looks great either way. Then I wanted to add some differentiation in that red tone, so I took a Screamer Pink from Citadel and went into some of these fleshy bits just to break up the redness a little, give this character unit just some difference. And it's not crazy, it's subtle, but it helps, I think, in the overall effect. And then we used our leather white on all of our teeth and bones and claws and hooves and whatever the heck Tyranid's feet are made out of. And boy, do lictors, especially these metal boys, have a lot of those. I mean, this was a 2-session paint job, partially because I had to wait for the wash on this stage to dry. But that sepia tone just brings the whole model to life. And then we went back in with our DIY wash, which I'm a big fan of, but it needs to be pulled away from the recesses a little more than I was hoping. I was hoping I could just dip it and leave it. But if you leave too much on those recesses, tend to get this little white frosting on them, which is very strange considering how dark the paint is. And then we bring our lictor back to life with an application of thinned pure red from the Army Painter over any highlight, any sharp bone areas. And then we took some pink and over all the Screamer Pink flesh spots and then washed it with black. Don't really know why, probably wasn't the best choice. I should have washed it with some sort of red tone, but I don't think that I had any available at the time. And then we highlighted up all of our bone, and boy, I love this. This might be my favorite model in the entire army. And adding a nice character like this really adds a lot. Especially the Death Leaper, who I painted using very similar steps. I'll probably run him as a Brood Lord, because I don't have one. This next step is a lesson in impatience. I really was getting tired of painting 2 coats of white to get all of these bones to look, especially when I have 10 gaunts with big old scything talons to do. So I cut up a part of a lava cake from Aldi so that I could stick the claws of these gaunts through those spaces, using my tester gaunt as an idea, and then we're just gonna spray paint it white. So I decided to go outside at about 10 o'clock at night, ideally the best time to spray paint things with detail, and I spray painted them all. They came out a little splotchy, which is fine, but it gave me a base coat that was gonna mean applying white later would be easier. And honestly, 1 coat per model because I had this base layer of white down. Was it worth it? Who can say, but I can be the most impatient miniature painter. A lot of these overspray areas were gonna need to get fixed later, but all I had to do was do a nice dry brush again of that pure white, which blended them in, and honestly, again, on the army scale, it's gonna look great. we have it. We are really on our way. Only a couple models left before we can call this army done. Next up is our Carnifex. I won this model on eBay when I was a kid, and I'm not sure who let me on eBay at that age. I haven't painted many models at this scale, but I did paint this orc mech and this big orc mech before, so I know sort of how to do it, but it's not my favorite thing painting giant guys. I mean, same steps as before, but just on a much larger scale. We gotta go through the carapace and black that out, and then we do our dry brushing. I mean, you've seen it all before. Oh boy, this took me about 2 sessions, which honestly is not that bad, and I could go back in and really tidy him up. I tried to add, again, some differentiation in color, so as you'll see, he's got some blues and oranges, and just some different techniques compared to the rest of the army. Our final step is going to be basing. You've all seen my baking soda glue craft paint recipe. If not, I've done it in every other video thus far. This time we're going to mix in some thicker grit sand, add a little differentiation faster. So we go craft paint, Elmer's glue, pile of baking soda, some of our sand, and stir that bad boy up. I definitely add a small splash of water just to help everything stir together, but I find this will make basically cement. Then we take our painter's palette knife, I believe is the technical term, and we smear that bad boy over every single model in the army. Adding in that sand now really helps down the road because we'll have some proper sand fused into the base. I don't need to add it later and glue. Then we leave these guys overnight and are left with nice, dry, sandy desert bases with some differentiation in color where that baking soda reacted differently. That's one of the benefits of doing this method, at least in my opinion. Then we're just going to chuck on our DIY dip wash on all of those bases, because why not? I honestly probably should have done something more, but I like the way this looked. And I figured I had it, save some money at this part too, right? Added some nice shadow, but after it dried, it definitely was not enough. So I had to go back in, do a dry brush with mummy robes to bring those little pebbles back out. And it was still missing some of that depth, so I unfortunately had to take some Army Painter's Strong Tone and go over every single base again. We're not going to waste time doing a second dry brush, but this really added some richness to those bases that they were definitely missing from my dip wash. Same thing is actually honest on the models themselves. Then we went back in, this time with cheap craft paint rather than model paint, because boy, I'm not wasting the money, and lined all of our bases in black, which basically made this army complete. And yes, I did paint the warriors off camera identically, don't worry. Which left me with this. Well, thank you for watching. I have been Chris. Once again, I like to paint things. I'm so excited to have this Tyranid army finished, ready for battles. I mean, my childhood is now complete. I don't really know what to do with myself. Either way, like, subscribe, comment, whatever all that nonsense is. Let me know if you have any cool ideas for videos, because now I'm out of really good ones. So we'll see what happens next. Either way, I've been Chris. Have a great night.